Admiral Korthok stood before the massive holographic display that dominated the command center of his flagship. The blue light from the projection cast strange shadows across his scaled face as he examined the data streaming in from the reconnaissance probes. His 6 eyes moved independently, each one focused on different aspects of the intelligence report that had just arrived from the outer rim of this unremarkable solar system. The planet they called Earth hung suspended in the three-dimensional image before him, rotating slowly as layers of information cascaded around it in glowing text and symbols. Korthak's mandibles clicked together rhythmically, a sound that his subordinates had learned to recognize as a sign of their admiral's growing satisfaction with what he was seeing. Commander Vex approached from the tactical station, his metallic footsteps echoing across the polished deck plates. The younger officer carried a data tablet containing the complete analysis of this primitive world that had caught the Empire's attention. According to their long-range sensors, this third planet, from an ordinary yellow star, represented exactly the kind of easy conquest that the Zephyrian Empire specialized in. Commander Vex, Admiral Korthak spoke without turning away from the display, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had overseen the subjugation of dozens of worlds. Present your complete assessment of this Earth. Vex activated his tablet and began reading from the compiled intelligence data. Sir, this civilization shows all the characteristics of a primitive, pre-spacefaring species. Our deep space reconnaissance indicates they are still using chemical propulsion systems for their limited space exploration efforts. Their primary method of communication appears to be electromagnetic radiation transmitted through primitive radio and microwave technologies. The commander paused to highlight specific sections of the orbital scans on the main display. Most significantly, sir, we detect no orbital defense platforms of any kind. No quantum shield generators protecting their atmosphere. No antimatter weapon signatures anywhere in their solar system. They appear to be completely defenseless against any form of advanced military action. Korthak's secondary arms gestured dismissively as he processed this information. Throughout his long military career, he had encountered many worlds exactly like this one. Primitive civilizations that had developed basic technology, but remained completely unprepared for contact with the greater galactic community. Such worlds invariably fell within hours of the Empire's arrival, their populations too shocked and overwhelmed to mount any meaningful resistance. What about their population centers? The Admiral inquired, zooming the display to focus on the planet's surface. The continents were clearly visible, dotted with concentrations of artificial light that indicated major cities and industrial areas. Approximately 8 billion inhabitants distributed across 7 major landmasses, Vex replied, consulting his data. They appear to have achieved basic industrialization and show signs of primitive nuclear technology, but nothing that would pose any threat to our forces. Their largest population centers are completely unshielded and vulnerable to standard orbital bombardment protocols. The Admiral's mandibles clicked faster now, a clear indication of his growing enthusiasm for this potential conquest. In his 3 centuries of service to the Zephyrian Empire, he had personally overseen the absorption of 137 different worlds using the same time-tested methodology that had never failed to produce complete victory. The process was elegantly simple and devastatingly effective. First, the intimidation fleet would emerge from hyperspace in perfect battle formation, positioned to demonstrate overwhelming military superiority. The sight of 1,000 Zephyrian warships arranged in attack position had broken the will of countless civilizations before a single weapon had been fired. Next came the ultimatum. BROADCAST across all communication frequencies in the target species' primary languages. The message was always the same: immediate and unconditional surrender, followed by incorporation into the Empire as a subject world. Resistance would result in the complete annihilation of their civilization. Most primitive worlds surrendered. Within minutes of receiving this message, those foolish enough to attempt resistance were crushed so quickly and thoroughly that other worlds in the region learned to submit without question. The reputation of Zephyrian military might had spread throughout this entire galactic sector, making future conquests even easier to accomplish. Sir, Commander Vex continued, Our xenology department has also provided preliminary analysis of human psychology based on intercepted communications. They appear to be a fractious species, divided into numerous competing political entities. Their history shows constant warfare among themselves, suggesting they lack the unity necessary to coordinate an effective defense against external threats. This information pleased Korthok even more. Divided civilizations were always the easiest to conquer, as their internal conflicts prevented them from presenting a unified response to invasion. The humans would likely spend precious time arguing among themselves, while Zephyrian forces established complete orbital control. The Admiral walked closer to the holographic display, studying the planet's defensive capabilities in greater detail. Their analysis showed scattered military installations across the surface, but nothing that could threaten spacecraft in orbit. A few primitive satellites circled the planet, apparently used for communication and observation rather than defensive purposes. "What is their current technological development level?" he asked, manipulating the display controls to examine their industrial infrastructure. "Early space age, sir. They have achieved basic orbital flight and have established a small research station around their natural satellite. However, their most advanced spacecraft appear to be simple chemical-fueled vehicles with extremely limited range and capability. They show no evidence of faster-than-light travel or any understanding of hyperspace physics." Korthok nodded approvingly. Civilizations at this development stage were perfect targets for incorporation into the Empire. They possessed enough technological sophistication to be useful as a workforce, but lacked the military capabilities to pose any real threat to Zephyrian forces. "Deploy the intimidation fleet," the Admiral commanded, his voice carrying across the bridge as subordinates rushed to carry out his orders. "Standard formation, 1,000 ships. Position them in high orbit around the planet, where they will be clearly visible to any primitive sensors the humans might possess." The bridge crew moved with practiced efficiency, sending encrypted communications to the massive fleet of warships waiting in hyperspace. Each vessel in the intimidation fleet was a masterpiece of Zephyrian military engineering, equipped with weapons capable of reducing entire continents to molten slag within minutes. "Estimated time to fleet deployment?" Korthok inquired as his officers coordinated the complex logistics of moving 1,000 warships through hyperspace. 17 standard time units, sir. The fleet will emerge simultaneously at coordinates designed to maximize psychological impact on the target population. As the preparations continued around him, Admiral Korthok allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. This conquest would add another world to the Empire's growing collection of subject planets, providing new resources and population for the glory of Zephyrian civilization. The humans would soon learn what countless other species had discovered before them. Resistance to the Empire was futile. Submission was the only path to survival. Within hours, hyperspace rifts would tear open around Earth, and another primitive world would bow before the unstoppable might of the Zephyrian Empire. The hyperspace rifts opened like massive tears in the fabric of space itself, each one glowing with an eerie blue-white light that illuminated the darkness of Earth's outer solar system. One by one, the ships of the Zephyrian Intimidation Fleet emerged from these dimensional gateways with the precision of a perfectly choreographed dance that had been performed countless times before across the galaxy. Admiral Korthok watched from the command bridge of his flagship as the massive vessels took their assigned positions in the traditional formation that had struck fear into the hearts of civilizations for over 3 centuries. The sight was truly magnificent to behold, a testament to the military might and organizational superiority of the Zephyrian Empire. Each warship in the fleet was a masterpiece of advanced engineering, their hulls gleaming with the distinctive silver-blue metal that marked them as vessels of the Empire. The larger battleships stretched 4 kilometers in length, their surfaces bristling with weapon arrays and shield generators that could reduce entire planets to cosmic dust. Smaller cruisers and destroyers filled the spaces between these giants, creating an intricate web of firepower that completely surrounded the primitive human world. The formation itself was designed for maximum psychological impact rather than tactical necessity. The ships arranged themselves in concentric spheres around Earth, with the flagship positioned at the center where it could coordinate the entire operation. This configuration had been refined over centuries of conquest, carefully calculated to demonstrate overwhelming superiority while remaining far enough from the target world to avoid any desperate last-minute attacks. Commander Vex moved to the communications station and began the standard procedures for contacting a primitive civilization. The message would be broadcast across every electromagnetic frequency that the humans might be monitoring, ensuring that their leadership received the ultimatum regardless of their technological limitations. Admiral Korthok activated the main communication array and began speaking in the formal tone that protocol demanded for such occasions. His words were automatically translated into the dominant human language by sophisticated linguistic computers that had analyzed years of intercepted transmissions from Earth. Primitive inhabitants of the third planet, his voice carried across. Space with the authority of absolute power, you are now subjects of the Zephyrian Empire. Your world has been selected for incorporation into our greater civilization. You will surrender immediately and prepare for the arrival of our occupation forces. Any attempt at resistance will result in the complete annihilation of your species and the sterilization of your planet. You have one standard time unit to transmit your unconditional surrender. The Admiral closed the channel and settled back in his command chair, confident that the humans would respond within minutes with frantic pleas for mercy. This was always the most satisfying moment of any conquest, when the target species finally understood the hopelessness of their situation and began desperately negotiating for the survival of their people. The response came much faster than expected, transmitted on a clear frequency that suggested the humans possessed better communication technology than their preliminary analysis had indicated. The voice that emerged from the speakers was calm and controlled, showing none of the panic or fear that typically characterized first contact with primitive civilizations. Unknown vessels. This is Admiral Jack Morrison of the Terran Defense. Command. You have entered restricted space without authorization and are in violation of interstellar law. You will withdraw your forces immediately and depart this system, or you will face appropriate defensive action from the armed forces of Earth. Commander Vex's antennae began twitching rapidly, a biological response that indicated his amusement at what he had just heard. The idea that these primitive humans would threaten the mighty Zephyrian Empire was so absurd that it struck him as genuinely funny. "Sir," he said, trying to suppress what his species used as laughter, "they are actually threatening us. Single. Backwards planet is demanding that we withdraw our fleet of 1,000 warships." Admiral Korthok's mandibles clicked together in what could have been either amusement or irritation. Throughout his long career, he had encountered a few species that initially responded to contact with bravado rather than immediate surrender. These displays of false courage never lasted long once the reality of their situation became clear. "Let them posture and make their empty threats," the Admiral replied dismissively. "When our time limit expires, we will demonstrate exactly why resistance to the Empire is futile. Perhaps a demonstration of our firepower will help them understand their situation more clearly." However, something about the human response troubled him slightly. The voice on the communication had been too calm, too professional, most primitive. Species either panicked completely or tried to bluster their way through first contact. This Admiral Morrison had sounded like someone who was genuinely prepared for this encounter. Korthok decided to examine the tactical display more carefully, looking for any details that their initial reconnaissance might have missed. The planet appeared exactly as their intelligence reports had described it: primitive, undefended, and completely vulnerable to orbital attack. "Commander," he said, "run another deep scan of the system. Look for any defensive installations that might have escaped our initial survey." Before Vex could acknowledge the order, alarms began sounding throughout the flagship. The tactical officer at the sensor station looked up with confusion and growing alarm as his instruments detected something that should have been impossible. "Sir?" The officer called out, "I am detecting massive energy signatures throughout the solar system. Multiple launch events are occurring simultaneously from what appear to be those primitive communication satellites we cataloged earlier." Admiral Korthok spun around to face the main tactical display just in time to see the truth of what the humans had prepared for them. What the Zephyrian intelligence officers had dismissed as simple communication and observation, satellites were revealing their true nature as the humans activated systems that had been hidden beneath harmless-looking exteriors across the solar system. Dozens of these seemingly innocent satellites began extending weapon arrays and targeting systems that had been completely invisible to Zephyrian sensors. The humans had somehow managed to disguise advanced military hardware as primitive space junk, creating a network of hidden weapons platforms that now had the entire invasion fleet surrounded. Kinetic projectiles launching from multiple positions, the tactical officer reported, his voice rising with panic as he tried to process the impossible data flowing across his screens. Acceleration profiles indicate they will reach significant fractions of light speed within seconds. The first human weapons fired before Admiral Korthak could even begin to comprehend what was happening to his carefully planned invasion. The objects that emerged from the hidden weapons platforms were not energy beams or exotic particles, but simple chunks of metal accelerated to velocities that turned them into devastating kinetic weapons. The impacts began exactly 3 seconds later. The first kinetic projectile struck the Zephyrian battleship Vengeance of Zephyr. With the force of a small star going supernova, the massive warship, which had terrorized dozens of worlds across 3 centuries of conquest, simply ceased to exist in any recognizable form. Where once a kilometer-long vessel had dominated space with its imposing presence, there remained only an expanding cloud of superheated metal, vapor, and ionized gases glowing like a miniature nebula. Admiral Korthok stared at his tactical display, in complete disbelief as the impossible became reality before his eyes. The sophisticated Zephyrian shields that protected his fleet had been specifically designed to deflect the most advanced energy weapons known to galactic civilization. Plasma cannons, particle beams, quantum disruptors, antimatter torpedoes, all of these exotic weapons could be neutralized by the protective barriers that surrounded each ship. But these human weapons were something entirely different. Simple. Chunks of metal accelerated to velocities that approached the speed of light itself, carried kinetic energy that no shield technology could deflect or absorb. The laws of physics that governed momentum and mass became the ultimate weapon, turning ordinary matter into projectiles that hit. With the destructive power of small nuclear explosions, the second salvo arrived before the Admiral could even begin to formulate orders for his fleet. 11 more ships vanished in brilliant flashes of light as relativistic projectiles tore through their hulls like paper. The Sword of Empire exploded so violently that its destruction sent shockwaves through nearby vessels, damaging their systems and disrupting their formation. Evasive maneuvers? Korthak screamed across the communication channels, his voice breaking with panic as he watched his seemingly invincible armada being systematically destroyed by weapons that his military scientists had never even considered possible. But there was nowhere for the massive warships to run. The human weapons platforms were positioned throughout the entire solar system, creating overlapping fields of fire that covered every possible escape route. What the Zephyrians had assumed were primitive asteroids floating harmlessly through space began revealing their true nature as massive kinetic weapons guided by sophisticated targeting systems. Commander Vex gripped his control station as the flagship shuddered under the impact of debris from a nearby explosion. His antennae were now rigid with terror as he watched the tactical display show target after target disappearing from their sensors. The carefully planned invasion was turning into the worst military disaster in Zephyrian history. "Sir," he reported, his voice cracking with fear, "the humans have weaponized everything in their solar system. Those asteroids we detected are actually guided missiles with their own propulsion systems. The space debris we cataloged is being used as precision ammunition. Even their gravity fields have been modified somehow to prevent our ships from entering hyperspace." The Admiral tried to comprehend the magnitude of what the humans had accomplished. They had turned their entire star system into a massive weapons platform. Using technology that was both incredibly advanced and deceptively simple, instead of relying on exotic energy sources or rare materials, They had harnessed the most basic forces in the universe to create weapons of unimaginable destruction. Another wave of kinetic projectiles swept through the Zephyrian formation. This time the Admiral could see them coming on the long-range sensors. Dozens of metal slugs, each one no larger than a personal transport vehicle, streaking through space at velocities that made them visible only as brief streaks of light against the cosmic background. The Destroyer of Worlds. One of the Empire's most powerful dreadnoughts attempted to use its point defense systems to intercept the incoming projectiles. The rapid-fire energy cannons managed to vaporize 3 of the approaching weapons, but the remaining projectiles struck with such tremendous force that the entire ship folded in on itself like a collapsing star. "Sir," the tactical officer called out desperately, "I am detecting massive energy signatures from the planet's surface. They appear to be launching something much larger than the previous attacks." Admiral Korthok focused his attention on the sensor readings coming from Earth itself. The planet that they had dismissed as primitive and defenseless was now revealing launch facilities that had been completely hidden from their reconnaissance efforts. Massive electromagnetic accelerators were firing projectiles directly from the surface, using the planet's rotation and orbital velocity to add even more kinetic energy to their weapons. But the true shock came when human warships began decloaking throughout the Zephyrian formation. These vessels had been hiding in perfect ambush positions using stealth technology that was far beyond anything the Empire had encountered before. The ships themselves were sleek and predatory in design, built for speed and firepower rather than the intimidating bulk that characterized Zephyrian military architecture. These were not the primitive chemical-fueled spacecraft that their intelligence reports had described. These were advanced warships that moved with deadly grace through the battlefield, their hulls reflecting no light and generating no heat signatures that Zephyrian sensors could detect. The weapons these human ships carried were just as surprising as their stealth capabilities. Instead of the exotic energy beams and quantum torpedoes that most spacefaring civilizations use for ship-to-ship combat, the humans had equipped their vessels with railguns and mass drivers that fired solid projectiles at incredible velocities. Each human warship became a mobile weapons platform, capable of launching dozens of kinetic projectiles per minute. The railguns used electromagnetic fields to accelerate metal slugs to speeds that made them almost impossible to track or intercept. The mass drivers hurled larger projectiles with slightly lower velocities, but devastating impact power. The Asterisk Pride of Zephyr Asterisk attempted to engage one of the human vessels in direct combat, bringing its massive plasma cannons to bear on the smaller enemy ship. But before the Zephyrian gunners could achieve a target lock, the human vessel had already fired 3 railgun rounds that punched through the battleship's armor like it was made of thin metal foil. Admiral Korthak watched helplessly as his proud armada dissolved into expanding clouds of debris and superheated gas. Ship after ship vanished from his tactical display as human weapons found their marks with devastating accuracy. The few vessels that survived the initial assault found their electronic systems failing as human cyber warfare packages infiltrated their networks and shut down critical systems. The communications array went silent as ship after ship stopped responding to hails from the flagship. Life support systems failed on multiple vessels as human electronic attacks targeted the most vulnerable systems first. Even the ships that remained physically intact were rendered helpless as their crews struggled with failing equipment and dying power systems in exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds. The 1,000 ships of the Zephyrian Intimidation Fleet had been reduced to drifting wreckage scattered across Earth's solar system. Admiral Korthok sat in his command chair surrounded by the dim emergency lighting that now illuminated the bridge of his once mighty flagship. The main power systems had failed completely, leaving only the basic life support functioning on backup energy cells. The massive warship that had once been the pride of the Zephyrian fleet now drifted helplessly through space. Like a piece of cosmic debris, the Admiral's 6 eyes moved slowly across the darkened control panels that surrounded him, each one displaying nothing but error messages and system failure warnings. The quantum engines that had carried his ship across thousands of light years were completely dead. The weapon arrays that could have reduced entire continents to ash were offline and unresponsive. Even the communication systems were functioning on emergency power only. Commander Vex stood nearby, his normally rigid military posture now slumped with defeat and exhaustion. The younger officer's antennae drooped as he tried to process reports. From the few surviving crew members scattered throughout the ship, most of the vessel's sections had lost both power and atmosphere, forcing the survivors to retreat to the heavily shielded command areas. Through the main viewing port, Korthok could see the scattered remains of what had once been the most powerful military force in this sector of the galaxy. Pieces of destroyed warships drifted past like a metal graveyard, some still glowing with residual heat from the devastating impacts they had suffered. The sight was almost too terrible to comprehend. A movement in the distance caught the Admiral's attention, and he focused his eyes on a sleek shape approaching through the debris field. The vessel was unlike anything in the Zephyrian military database, with smooth angular lines that seemed to flow together in a design that was both beautiful and somehow threatening. The human ship moved with a grace that spoke of advanced technology, gliding between the floating wreckage without any apparent effort. Its hull appeared to absorb light rather than reflect it, creating an almost ghostly appearance against the star-filled background of space. Weapon ports were visible along its sides, though they were designed with an elegance that made them seem like natural parts of the ship's structure. As the human vessel drew closer, Korthak noticed that it showed no signs of damage despite having participated in the battle that had destroyed his entire fleet. There were no scorch marks from energy weapons, no dents from impact damage, no signs that it had been in combat. At all, the ship appeared as pristine as if it had just emerged from a construction facility. The communication system activated with a soft chime, ding, and suddenly the main display screen flickered to life with enough power to show an incoming transmission. The image that appeared was clear and sharp, showing the interior of what was obviously the human vessel's command center. The being that appeared on the screen was immediately recognizable as one of the humans they had come to conquer, though. Korthok was struck by how similar this species appeared to several others that the Empire had encountered during its expansion across the galaxy. The human had two eyes, positioned forward on its head like those of a predator, and skin that was pale compared to some species, but unremarkable in the context of galactic diversity. Yet there was something in those eyes that made the Admiral feel deeply uncomfortable, despite the physical similarities to other conquered species. This human possessed a quality that suggested intelligence and capability far beyond what their primitive appearance might indicate. It was the look of a hunter studying its prey, hidden behind the facade of a seemingly harmless creature. "I am Captain David Miller of the Terran Defense Force," the human said, his voice carrying a calmness that was somehow more unsettling than anger or triumph would have been. "I imagine you have many questions about what has just occurred here." Admiral Korthak tried to speak, but found that his throat had become dry with shock and disbelief. The magnitude of his defeat was still too enormous to fully comprehend. His voice, when it finally emerged, was barely above a whisper. "This is impossible," he managed to say, his words carrying the weight of 3 centuries of military experience. "That had just been rendered meaningless. Our intelligence reports showed that your species was primitive. No advanced technology. No spacefaring military capability. You should not have been able to resist even a single ship, let alone destroy our entire invasion force." Captain Miller's facial expression changed in a way that Korthak would later learn was called a smile, though at the moment it seemed more like the baring of teeth that a predator might display before attacking. The human's eyes remained fixed on the Admiral with an intensity that made him want to look away. That appearance of primitiveness was quite deliberate. Admiral Miller replied with the same unsettling calm. "We wanted you and every other aggressive species in the galaxy to think exactly what you thought. We have been watching your empire for many decades, studying your military tactics, analyzing your technology, and identifying your weaknesses." The human paused and gestured to someone outside the view of the communications screen. Suddenly, the display expanded to show holographic projections that filled the space around Miller's image. What Korthok saw made his mandibles click together in a rapid rhythm that indicated extreme agitation and fear. The holographic displays revealed the true scope of Earth's defensive preparations. Throughout the solar system, hidden installations became visible as their stealth systems were deactivated for demonstration purposes. Weapon platforms that had been perfectly disguised as asteroids revealed their true nature, extending massive railgun barrels and targeting arrays that had been completely invisible to Zephyrian sensors, space stations that appeared to be simple. Research facilities opened to reveal manufacturing centers where kinetic weapons were being mass-produced. Even some of the smaller moons showed signs of extensive modification, their surfaces concealing launch systems for the devastating projectiles that had destroyed the invasion fleet. When we finally developed faster-than-light travel capability, Miller continued, we made a conscious decision to remain hidden from galactic civilization. We spent decades observing other species, learning about their military technologies and combat doctrines. We discovered something very interesting about how advanced civilizations conduct warfare. The holographic displays shifted to show technical analyses of various alien weapon systems, including detailed breakdowns of Zephyrian military technology. Korthok realized with growing horror that the humans knew more about his own ship's capabilities than some of his own officers did. Every spacefaring species we observed fights using the same basic principles, Miller explained with the patience of a teacher instructing a student. Energy shields to deflect incoming attacks, plasma weapons and particle beams for offense, quantum technology for advanced applications. Everyone assumes that more exotic and complex technology automatically means more effective weapons. Human's smile grew wider, and his eyes seemed to gleam with something that might have been amusement. But you all forgot about the most fundamental forces in the universe, Admiral. Mass, velocity, and momentum. Ow. Weapons do not require exotic, matter, or zero-point energy sources. They just need physics. The quantum communication networks that connected the civilized galaxy began carrying the most shocking military intelligence report in recorded history within hours of the battle's conclusion. From the central worlds of the Galactic Council to the remote trading posts on the frontier, the same impossible message spread through diplomatic channels, commercial networks, and military communications with the speed of light itself. The mighty Zephyrian Empire, whose intimidation fleet had conquered 137 worlds without suffering a single significant defeat, had been completely destroyed by a species that every intelligence agency in the galaxy had classified as primitive and defenseless. Not simply defeated in a prolonged campaign, but utterly obliterated in what was already being called the shortest war in galactic history. Admiral. Korthok found himself in the strangest situation of his long military career as he stood in the observation lounge of a human starship, looking out at the peaceful blue world that had just demonstrated the most devastating military capability he had ever witnessed. The vessel that now carried him was comfortable beyond anything he had expected, its quarters that had been specifically modified to accommodate his physiology and dietary requirements. Captain Miller walked into the lounge carrying 2 containers of what appeared to be some form of human beverage, offering one to the Admiral with the same calm courtesy that he had shown during their first communication. The human's behavior was completely different from what Korthok had experienced with other conquering species, who typically treated defeated enemies with contempt or outright cruelty. You are treating me far better than I deserve, the Admiral said, accepting the offered drink despite his confusion about human intentions. In my position, most species would have executed the surviving enemy commanders or used them as examples to discourage future resistance. Miller settled into a chair designed for human anatomy and gazed out at the earth below them as he considered his response. We studied your species extensively before this encounter, Admiral. We know that you personally have been responsible for the conquest of dozens of worlds, but we also know that you were following the orders and traditions of your civilization. Executing you would accomplish nothing except creating more hatred and fear. The human turned to face Korthok directly, and once again the Admiral was struck by the intelligence and depth he saw in those predatory eyes. We do not want an empire. Admiral, we have no interest in conquering other worlds or ruling over alien species. Simply want to be left alone to develop our civilization in peace. However, any species that threatens Earth or our allies will face exactly the same response that your fleet received. Through the transparent aluminum viewing port, Korthok could see the orbital facilities that surrounded the human homeworld. What had appeared to be simple space stations during their initial reconnaissance were now revealed as massive military installations. Their true purpose hidden beneath civilian facades that had completely fooled Zephyrian intelligence. Manufacturing. Platforms were producing kinetic weapons on an industrial scale, while research facilities developed new applications for the physics-based warfare that had proven so devastatingly effective. The humans had created a military-industrial complex that could defend not just their own world, but potentially dozens of other systems throughout the galaxy. Within the first week following the battle, reports began arriving from across known space that painted a picture of rapidly changing galactic politics. The hegemony of Krax, which had been planning an invasion of the peaceful Altarian colonies, suddenly withdrew their fleet and declared their intention to pursue diplomatic solutions instead. The warlords of the Outer Rim, who had terrorized merchant vessels for generations, began negotiating surrender terms with their former victims. The news that a supposedly primitive species had destroyed the most powerful military force in the UTE galaxy sent shockwaves through every aggressive civilization that had built their power on intimidation and superior technology. If the humans could obliterate 1,000 Zephyrian warships in under 5 minutes, what chance did any other predatory species have against them? Captain Miller provided Korthok with detailed information about what the humans were calling the Solar Accord, a defensive alliance that they were offering to any peaceful civilization that requested protection from aggressive neighbors. The terms were surprisingly generous, requiring only that member species commit to non-aggression and mutual defense. While the humans provided advanced defensive technology and military support when needed, the human military had already begun deploying hidden weapons platforms throughout strategic locations across the galaxy, creating a network of kinetic weapon systems that could respond to threats against any Solar Accord member within minutes of an attack beginning. These installations were virtually impossible to detect using conventional sensor technology, allowing them to remain hidden until needed. The galaxy has been dominated by species that believe military might comes from exotic technology and overwhelming numbers, Miller explained as he showed Korthok holographic displays of the new defensive network. They build bigger ships, develop more powerful energy weapons, and create more sophisticated shielding systems. But they all forgot that the universe operates according to basic physical laws that cannot be violated or circumvented. The Admiral studied the technical specifications that the humans were sharing with him, marveling at the elegant simplicity of their approach to warfare. Instead of trying to develop increasingly complex weapons, they had focused on perfecting the application of fundamental physics principles to military problems. Mass accelerated to high velocity became an unstoppable force that no known shielding technology could deflect. As the days passed, more reports arrived detailing the transformation of galactic politics that was occurring in response to human intervention. It's a peaceful trade coalition, which had been forced to pay tribute to various military powers for decades, declared their independence and requested membership in the Solar Accord. The Scientific Preservation Society, whose research stations had been repeatedly raided by resource-hungry empires, began openly conducting their experiments under human protection. Even some former enemies of these peaceful civilizations were beginning to request negotiations for trade agreements and mutual cooperation treaties, recognizing that the old system of conquest and intimidation was no longer viable in a galaxy where humans were willing to intervene on behalf of the defenseless. When the time came for Admiral Korthok to be released, Captain Miller accompanied him to a neutral trading station that served as a meeting point for diplomatic representatives from dozens of different species. The station's central plaza was filled with beings from across the galaxy, many of them carrying messages and proposals for the human government. Miller handed the Admiral a sealed message container, designed to be opened only by high-ranking Zephyrian officials. This contains Earth's formal diplomatic position regarding future interactions with your empire and any other aggressive civilizations. I suggest that your leaders read it very carefully before making any decisions about their future. Military policies. The human paused and gave Korthok that same unsettling smile that seemed to contain depths of knowledge and capability that the Admiral could not fully comprehend. Remember, Admiral, physics is universal throughout this galaxy and every other, and humans have become very, very good at applying physics to solve problems.